Okay, let's talk about your career, because it's about to get turned upside down by AGI, that's Artificial General Intelligence. Now, you probably think that if you're good at your job, you're safe, right? Well, what if I told you the entire rulebook has just been thrown out the window? We're going to dig into what's really happening here.
So, there's this really weird thing happening in the workplace right now, a kind of paradox. Picture this. You've got two professionals. On paper, they're basically twins. Same skills, same background, they're both totally up to speed on all the latest AI tools. And yet, their careers are going in completely opposite directions.
Yeah, you've got professional A over here who's suddenly become the go-to person for everything important. They're shaping strategy, they're seen as totally essential. Their career is just taking off. And then there's professional B. They're working just as hard, maybe even harder, but they're being treated like, well, like a Lego brick, a replaceable part in a bigger machine. One system update, and poof, their value is just gone. So this is the big mystery, right? They have the same skills. So if it's not about talent and it's not about how hard you work, what is this invisible force that's splitting the professional world in two? What's the difference between a career that skyrockets and one that just disappears? You know, a lot of people will tell you it's about who's better at AI or who's a faster learner. But honestly, that's just not it. That's missing the forest for the trees. The real reason, the thing that will make or break your career in this new AGI world, is way more fundamental. It all comes down to one word: position. And let's be super clear here. This has nothing to do with how clever your prompts are or how many new apps you've learned this week. Seriously, that's just the price of admission now. The real game is being played on a much bigger, more structural level. And frankly, if you don't understand it, you're at a huge disadvantage. And this really gets to the heart of it. This is the core idea from the source material we're looking at. It says, professional inequality does not emerge from the amount of ability one possesses, but from where that ability is positioned within the overall system. Just let that sink in for a second. It's not about how good you are anymore. It's about where you are. Is your job set up to give you leverage, or is it set up to be easily replaced? So what does position actually mean in a practical sense? Well, the source breaks it down into three really clear critical splits. These are the things that will define where you land in this new world of work. All right, here they are. First, we've got upstream versus downstream. Second, context versus technique. And the third one, which is arguably the most important, is whether you're a system architect or just a system component. Getting your head around these three ideas, well, it's pretty much everything. Okay, first up, upstream versus downstream. Think of downstream as the how, the actual doing of the stuff. Writing the code, drafting the report, creating the design. This is exactly what AGI is getting incredibly good at, incredibly fast. But upstream, that's the why. Why are we building this? What problem are we actually trying to solve? That's still human territory. The huge takeaway here is that value is flowing away from execution and towards direction. Next, we have context versus technique. Technique is knowing how to use a specific tool or the syntax for a programming language. It's procedural stuff that AGI can learn in a heartbeat. Context, though, that's a whole different ballgame. That's knowing how to read a client's body language, how to navigate the tricky internal politics of a project, or making a tough judgment call that isn't in any textbook. And here's the bottom line. One of these puts you in a position to supervise AGI, the other puts you in direct competition with it. And that brings us to our final split. And honestly, this one is the most brutal of them all. Are you a system architect or are you a system component? An architect is someone who designs the machine. They set the rules. As the system gets bigger and more powerful, so do they. A component, on the other hand, is just a cog in that machine. And here's the scary part. No matter how good that cog is, its value can be completely erased literally overnight by a single system update. So when you take these three splits and put them all together, you get a picture of what's happening. You have upstream, context, and architect on one side, and downstream, technique, and component on the other. And this isn't just about individual careers anymore. This is like a tectonic shift that is completely reshaping the entire professional landscape. Just think about the classic corporate structure for a minute. For decades, the backbone of any company was its professional middle class, right? The experienced managers, the senior engineers, the people who were just really, really good at executing their jobs. Their skill was being reliably above average, and that made them the stable core. But that's changing. We're seeing a new shape form, kind of like an hourglass. At the very top, you've got this small, pretty elite group.
These are the system architects, the strategic thinkers. They're the ones operating upstream, using their contextual knowledge to decide how AGI gets used. And as you can imagine, they're capturing a huge chunk of the value. Then we get to the middle, and the middle is collapsing. It's hollowing out. Why? Because that whole category of reliably above average execution is precisely what AGI is designed to do, but better, faster, and cheaper. So that stable core we talked about, it's disappearing, leaving this huge, gaping hole. And then, at the bottom of the hourglass, you have a much larger group of people. Let's call them task operators. They're doing all the leftover jobs, the stuff that's too small or too cheap or too physically awkward to be worth automating. For now, anyway. Okay, so when you see this new hourglass shape, the next question becomes intensely personal, doesn't it? How do you make sure you don't get squeezed out of that collapsing middle or stuck at the bottom? How do you escape what we're calling the execution trap? Look, the old playbook isn't just outdated, it's dangerous now. Just work harder, learn another skill. That's not enough. You could be the best in the world at your specific task, but if that task is downstream, if you're positioned as a component, then you're basically just running on a treadmill, trying to outpace a machine that never gets tired. So it really boils down to this one fundamental choice. Are you going to stay in the execution trap, focused on the how, where you're forced to compete with AGI? Or are you going to fight for a seat at the decision table? That means moving upstream, focusing on the why, shaping the system, and learning how to deploy AGI instead of competing against it. This is the single most important strategic question for every professional out there today. And that leaves us with one last, really big question that the source material raises. If this monumental shift from doing to directing is already happening, then why are our schools, our colleges, our entire training infrastructure still set up almost exclusively to teach people how to do things? Why are we still churning out people optimized for the downstream when all the value is moving upstream? That's definitely something to chew